The relentless sun beat down on the vast, unforgiving plains of Montana Territory. Dust devils danced in the distance, ephemeral ghosts against the endless horizon. Inside the modest yet sturdy ranch house of the Double Bar Ranch, Jedediah Stone, a man whose hands were as calloused as his heart was guarded, stared out the window. His gaze was fixed on the distant mountains, a brooding landscape that mirrored his own inner turmoil. Jedediah was a man of few words, his life dictated by the rhythm of the land and the silent hum of solitude. He'd built this ranch from nothing, a testament to his grit and determination, but it was a lonely empire. His housekeeper, a quiet, observant woman named Clara, moved with an efficiency that belied her delicate frame. She was a recent arrival, hired out of a desperate need for help after a harsh winter had claimed his previous hand. Clara carried an air of quiet resilience, her eyes holding a wisdom that seemed beyond her years. She rarely spoke, preferring to let her actions do the talking. Jedediah, a man who had learned to trust actions over words, found a strange comfort in her silent competence. He knew little of her past, and frankly he didn't ask. Her presence was a balm, a quiet order in his otherwise solitary existence. One sweltering afternoon, a dust cloud appeared on the horizon, growing steadily larger. It was a wagon, moving at a pace that suggested urgency or perhaps desperation. Jedediah's hand instinctively went to the Colt, .45 holstered at his hip. Strangers in this part of the territory were rare and rarely brought good news. As the wagon drew closer, he could see it was carrying a family, their faces etched with hardship. A man, a woman, and two small children, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. They pulled up abruptly beside the ranch house, the horses lathered and breathing heavily. The man, his voice raspy, dismounted with difficulty. "Mister," he croaked, We need help. My wife, she's taken ill. Fever's taken hold. We've nowhere else to go." His wife, pale and listless, leaned against the wagon, her breathing shallow. Jedediah, despite his ingrained stoicism, felt a flicker of something akin to concern. He looked at Clara, who had emerged from the house, her own face a mask of quiet sympathy. "Clara," he said, his voice gruffer than he intended, "see to the lady. Get her inside and fetch some water. Plenty of it." As Clara gently helped the ailing woman into the house, Jedediah approached the man. "You folks ain't from around here," he stated, his eyes scanning the worn wagon and meager possessions. "What happened?" The man sighed, a sound heavy with defeat. "We were heading west, looking for a new start, but the fever, it took hold of my wife 2 days ago. We've been pushing hard, but she's fading." Jedediah nodded, his mind already calculating. He wasn't a man for sentiment, but he understood hardship. "You can rest here for now," he said gruffly. "We'll do what we can for your wife. My housekeeper is capable." He didn't offer much, but in this desolate land, it was more than many received. He watched as Clara, with gentle hands, guided the sick woman into a spare room, her presence a beacon of care in the harsh landscape. The spare room, usually reserved for infrequent travelers, was quickly transformed into a makeshift infirmary. Clara worked with a quiet determination, her movements precise and gentle. She bathed the woman's feverish brow with cool water, her touch soothing and reassuring. Jedediah, a man more accustomed to mending fences than tending to the sick, found himself watching Clara, a sense of unfamiliar helplessness gnawing at him. He could handle a runaway steer or a broken plow, but this fragile human ailment was beyond his expertise. The man, whose name was Thomas, sat by the bedside, his face a portrait of weary anxiety. His children, a boy of 7 and a girl of 5, huddled close to him, their small faces mirroring their father's worry. Jedediah, feeling a strange sense of responsibility, brought them food and ensured they had a place to rest. He found himself making more trips to the well than usual, his hands occupied with the simple yet essential tasks of care. As night fell, the woman's fever raged. Her labored breaths filled the small room, punctuated by low moans. Clara stayed by her side, her own exhaustion evident, but her resolve unwavering. Jedediah, unable to sleep, found himself pacing the floor outside the room, the silence of the ranch amplifying his unease. He heard Clara humming a soft, almost imperceptible tune, a lullaby that seemed to carry a hint of a distant, gentler life. He'd never known her to hum before. Thomas, his voice thick with emotion, approached Jedediah. "Thank you, Mr. Stone," he whispered. We didn't expect this kindness. We're so far from anywhere." Jedediah merely grunted, unable to articulate the discomfort he felt. It wasn't kindness, not exactly. It was obligation, a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. He looked at Clara through the dim light of the open doorway, her silhouette a study in tireless compassion. He saw the way she spoke softly to the sick woman, her words a low murmur of comfort. In the early hours of the morning, the woman's condition worsened. Her breathing grew shallow, her skin clammy. Clara, her face grim, turned to Jedediah. "She's not strong, Mr. Stone. We need to keep her warm and hydrated. I've used most of the clean water, and the herbs I brought are running low." Jedediah, his gruff exterior cracking slightly, felt a surge of urgency. "I'll go to the creek," he said, his voice firm. "Fill every pail we have, and I'll fetch what herbs I can find that might help." He didn't know what herbs he was looking for, but he knew he had to do something. He grabbed a lantern and headed out into the pre-dawn chill, leaving Clara to face the agonizing vigil alone. The weight of the fever, he realized, wasn't just on the woman. It was on all of them. The creek, a ribbon of silver in the lantern light, offered a brief respite from the oppressive silence of the ranch. As Jedediah filled the pails, his mind drifted. He wasn't prone to introspection, but the vulnerability of the situation, the raw display of human frailty, had stirred something within him. He thought of his own past, a closed book he rarely opened, a past that had led him to this isolated patch of land, seeking solace in solitude. He returned to find Clara still by the sickbed, her face illuminated by the flickering lamplight. The woman's breathing was a little more even, the fever showing a slight, tentative retreat. Thomas watched them, his eyes filled with a gratitude that was almost palpable. Jedediah poured the water, his movements steady. He'd also managed to find a few hardy plants that vaguely resembled the descriptions Clara had given him. He laid them on the table, a silent offering. Clara looked at the herbs, a faint smile touching her lips. "Thank you, Mr. Stone. These will help." She brewed a weak tea, her hands still steady despite her fatigue. As the sun began to paint the eastern sky with hues of rose and gold, the woman's fever finally broke. A collective sigh of relief swept through the small household. Thomas wept openly, his children clinging to his legs. In the days that followed, Clara's tireless care continued. She coaxed the woman to eat small portions, her voice a gentle murmur of encouragement. Jedediah, his duties now more about ensuring the family had food and shelter, observed Clara with a growing, if unspoken, admiration. He noticed the way she handled Thomas's children, her patience endless, her laughter rare but genuine when it surfaced. The little girl, Lily, especially seemed drawn to her, often following Clara around the house like a shadow. One evening, as Jedediah sat by the fire, mending a saddle, Thomas approached him again. "Mr. Stone," he began, his voice softer now, "I wanted to tell you, my wife, Eleanor, she was a school teacher before all this. She fell ill, and our savings dwindled. We heard tales of opportunities out west, and we thought it would be a fresh start." He paused, looking at his sleeping children. "But the journey has been harder than we imagined. We owe you so much." Jedediah simply nodded. "We all face hard times," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. He looked at Clara, who was tending to Eleanor. There was a quiet grace about her, a strength that radiated from her. He found himself wondering about her past, about the life she'd lived before arriving at the double bar. He'd always kept people at a distance, but Clara's presence was beginning to chip away at his defenses. He saw a resilience in her, a quiet dignity that he recognized, a reflection of the very qualities he valued most in himself. And for the first time in a long time, the silence of the ranch didn't feel quite so empty. The immediate crisis had passed, but the lingering effects of Eleanor's illness cast a long shadow. The family, grateful but still weary, remained at the double bar. Thomas, eager to contribute, began helping Jedediah with the ranch chores. His hands, though less calloused than Jedediah's, were willing. He was a quick learner, and Jedediah found himself relying on his help more than he expected. The routine of work, the shared labor under the vast Montana sky, began to forge a silent camaraderie between the two men. Clara, her duties now including tending to the children and helping Eleanor regain her strength, moved through the household with her characteristic quiet efficiency. Lily, the youngest, had clearly bonded with Clara. The little girl would often sit at Clara's feet as she mended clothes, her bright eyes following Clara's every movement. Lily would ask Clara questions about her day, her innocent curiosity a stark contrast to the hardships they had all faced. Clara, in turn, would answer with a gentle patience, her voice soft and melodious. Jedediah, while observing Clara's interactions with Lily, felt a strange pang. He hadn't seen much of Lily's mother, Eleanor, in her weakened state. He noticed how Clara would sometimes gently correct Lily, her tone firm but loving. He saw a maternal instinct in Clara that Jedediah had never witnessed before. It was a quiet strength, a nurturing spirit that seemed to blossom in the harsh environment. One evening, while Jedediah and Thomas were mending a section of fence far from the house, a sudden storm rolled in. The sky turned a bruised purple, and the wind whipped across the prairie, carrying with it the chilling bite of an early autumn. Rain began to fall in sheets, turning the dry earth into a muddy mire. They hurried back to the ranch, soaked to the bone. As they approached the house, Jedediah saw Clara standing on the porch, her shawl pulled tight around her. She was watching them, her face etched with concern. Thomas rushed to his wife's side, while Jedediah, shaking the water from his hat, nodded to Clara. "Looks like Fall's decided to make an early appearance," he grumbled, his voice a little rougher than usual from the cold. Inside, the warmth of the stove and the smell of supper were a welcome comfort. Clara had prepared a hearty stew, and the shared meal, eaten in the cozy confines of the ranch house, felt like a small victory against the harsh elements outside. Jedediah found himself watching Clara as she served the food, her movements economical but graceful. He noticed the way her eyes met his for a fleeting moment, a shared understanding passing between them, a recognition of the challenges they faced and the resilience they both possessed. He realized that Clara, in her own quiet way, was also bearing a significant burden, not just of work, but of emotional fortitude. He saw her unwavering care for Eleanor and the children, a quiet strength that was slowly, subtly, beginning to soften the edges of his own guarded heart. The days settled into a rhythm of shared labor and quiet coexistence. Thomas proved himself a capable hand, his earnestness a welcome addition to the ranch. Jedediah found himself working alongside him with less reservation, the silence between them filled with the sounds of honest work and the unspoken understanding of men who relied on each other. Eleanor, regaining her strength, began to assist Clara with the lighter household tasks, her gratitude evident in her every action. It was during this time that Jedediah began to notice Clara in a new light. He saw her not just as a housekeeper, but as an individual with her own unspoken history. He observed her quiet moments, the way her gaze sometimes drifted towards the distant mountains, a hint of longing in her eyes. He saw the careful way she tended to the small garden behind the house, her touch gentle with the struggling plants, a quiet nurturing that seemed to extend to everything she touched. One cool evening, as Jedediah sat on the porch watching the stars begin to prick the darkening sky, Clara emerged from the house, carrying a steaming mug. She approached him hesitantly, her usual reserve softened by the quiet intimacy of the moment. "Mr. Stone," she said softly, offering him the mug, "I made some chamomile tea. It might help with the chill." Jedediah took the mug, the warmth seeping into his hands. He met her gaze, and for the first time he saw a flicker of something beyond her usual stoicism, a vulnerability, a hint of a past that was not entirely untroubled. "Thank you, Clara," he said, his voice a low rumble. He took a sip of the tea. It was fragrant and soothing. They sat in silence for a few moments, the only sounds the chirping of crickets and the distant howl of a coyote. You handle things very well, Clara," Jedediah finally said, the words feeling clumsy on his tongue. "With Eleanor and the children." Clara looked down at her hands, her fingers tracing the rim of her own mug. "They needed help," she replied simply. Then, after a pause, she added almost to herself, "I know what it's like to be alone and afraid." Jedediah sensed that this was an opening, a rare glimpse into her inner world. He didn't press, but he listened. He saw her carefully chosen words, the way she held back more than she revealed. He understood that some wounds ran too deep to be easily shared, yet in that shared silence a new understanding was forming between them. He saw a strength in her resilience, a quiet fortitude that resonated with his own experiences. He realized that her apparent reserve wasn't a lack of feeling, but a deep-seated self-preservation. And for the first time, Jedediah felt a stir of something more than just pragmatic appreciation for her work. He felt a nascent curiosity, a subtle pull towards the woman who held so much quiet strength within her. The harmony at the Double Bar Ranch, though fragile, had begun to take root. Thomas was proving himself a reliable worker, and Eleanor was steadily recovering. The children, especially Lily, had found a semblance of stability and joy in Clara's gentle presence. Jedediah, for his part, found himself looking forward to the quiet moments shared with Clara, the brief exchanges that hinted at a depth he was unaccustomed to. However, the peace of the prairie was rarely undisturbed for long. Word travels, even in the vastness of Montana territory. A letter arrived for Thomas, delivered by a passing trapper. It was from a disgruntled former business partner, a man named Silas Croft, who accused Thomas of abandoning a shared venture and vowed to seek retribution. The letter was filled with veiled threats and accusations, stirring a new anxiety into their fragile peace. Thomas's face paled as he read the letter. "Silas," he muttered, his voice tight with worry. He was always ambitious. He never took losing well. He showed the letter to Jedediah, his hand trembling slightly. Jedediah read it, his jaw clenching. He recognized the tone of a man who wouldn't let things go. "He's a long way from here," Jedediah said, trying to sound reassuring, though a knot of unease tightened in his own gut. "He can't do much from there." "But he could come," Thomas replied, his eyes darting towards the open door as if expecting Croft to materialize from the dust. "He has a temper, and he knows I'm here now. He might think I've found something valuable." Clara, overhearing their hushed conversation, approached them, her brow furrowed. She'd seen the fear in Thomas's eyes, the worried glances exchanged between the men. "Is everything all right, Mr. Thomas?" she asked, her voice soft. Thomas managed a weak smile. "Just an old acquaintance, Clara. Nothing to worry about," but his eyes betrayed him. Jedediah saw the seeds of doubt being sown, the fear that had brought them to his doorstep now threatening to return in a new guise. He realized that his protection of this family was not a one-time act, but an ongoing commitment. He thought of Silas Croft, a name unknown to him, yet now a tangible threat looming on their horizon. Later that evening, Jedediah found himself out on the porch again, staring into the darkness. He felt a growing sense of responsibility, a protective instinct he hadn't felt in years. He considered Clara's quiet presence, her steady strength. He remembered her words, "I know what it's like to be alone and afraid." He wondered if this threat would bring back that fear, if it would shatter the fragile peace they had cultivated. He also found himself wondering about Clara's reaction, her quiet concern for the family. It was more than just a job to her, he realized. It was a shared burden, and that realization, more than the threat of Silas Croft, made him feel a strange, unfamiliar sense of unease. Silas Croft's letter hung in the air like a gathering storm. Thomas grew more restless with each passing day, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon. Eleanor, sensing his unease, tried to maintain a brave face, but the fear was palpable. Even the children seemed to sense the shift in atmosphere, their laughter less frequent, their games quieter. Jedediah, a man accustomed to facing threats head-on, found himself increasingly concerned. He knew Silas Croft's reputation, though from afar. A gambler, a cheat, and a man known for his ruthless streak. Jedediah began making preparations, checking his rifle, ensuring his ammunition was plentiful, and reinforcing the doors and windows of the ranch house. He didn't want to alarm the family unnecessarily, but he couldn't afford to be caught unprepared. Clara, ever observant, noticed the changes in Jedediah's demeanor. He was more withdrawn, his silences heavier. She saw him spending more time out by the barn, his movements deliberate and focused. One afternoon, she found him sharpening his hunting knife, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Mr. Stone," she began, her voice hesitant, Is there something more to this letter?" Jedediah paused, his gaze meeting hers. He saw the genuine concern in her eyes, a shared understanding of the potential danger. He decided to be direct. "Silas Croft is a dangerous man, Clara. He's not one to let things lie. If he believes Thomas wronged him, he might come looking for satisfaction." Clara's face paled slightly, but she didn't flinch. "And you believe he might come here?" "It's a possibility we have to consider," Jedediah admitted. "This ranch is isolated. He might think it's easy pickings." He watched her closely, expecting fear, perhaps tears. Instead, he saw a flicker of resolve. "What can we do?" she asked, her voice steady. Jedediah was surprised by her calmness. "We prepare. We stay alert. And if he comes, we make him regret it." He saw the small nod she gave, a silent acknowledgement of his words. He realized that Clara, like himself, possessed a quiet strength, a willingness to face adversity. He found himself increasingly relying on her steady presence, her ability to remain calm in the face of fear. He saw that her concern for the family was not just professional, it was personal. He wondered what had forged such resilience in her. The approaching storm, he realized, was not just a meteorological event, it was a test of their collective strength. The air grew heavy and still, the silence of the prairie unnerving. The sky had turned a menacing shade of grey, and the wind, which had been a gentle whisper, now moaned through the sparse trees surrounding the ranch. Jedediah had sent Thomas and his son, young David, to the far pasture to round up the remaining cattle, hoping to keep them out of immediate danger. Eleanor and Lily were inside the house, their faces pale but determined. Clara, her movements deliberate, helped Eleanor secure the shutters. Suddenly, a lone rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the bruised sky. He rode with a swagger, his posture radiating arrogance. Jedediah recognized him instantly from Thomas's description. Silas Croft. He was a burly man, his face hard and unyielding. He rode directly towards the ranch house, his horse kicking up dust. Jedediah met him at the edge of the porch, his rifle held loosely but ready. "State your business," Jedediah said, his voice low and steady. Silas Croft dismounted, a sneer on his face. "Where's Thomas? Tell him Silas Croft is here to collect what's owed." "Thomas ain't here," Jedediah replied, his eyes never leaving Croft's. "And whatever business you have with him, it ain't welcome on my land." Croft's eyes narrowed, scanning the ranch house. He saw Eleanor peeking through a crack in the shutters, her face white. He noticed Clara standing beside her, her posture unwavering. So the hired help is defending the other hired help, eh? Don't you know who I am? I know you're trespassing, Jedediah said, his grip tightening on the rifle. And I'm telling you to turn around and ride out. Croft let out a harsh laugh. You think you can stop me? I've dealt with tougher men than you. He reached for the pistol at his hip. In that instant, a shot rang out, not from Jedediah's rifle, but from the side of the house. Thomas, having anticipated Croft's arrival and circled back with his son, appeared from behind a cluster of trees, his own pistol raised. His shot had grazed Croft's horse, causing it to rear and throw him to the ground. The confrontation had begun. Croft, surprised and enraged, scrambled to his feet, drawing his pistol. Jedediah and Thomas fired simultaneously. Croft, caught in a crossfire, stumbled back, his arm dropping to his side. He glared at them, his face contorted with fury. "This ain't over," he spat, before turning and limping towards his fallen horse. He managed to mount it, his movements clumsy, and rode off into the growing storm, a promise of future retribution hanging in the air. The immediate threat was over, but the tension remained, a coiled spring waiting to be released. Clara, her breath coming in short gasps, watched the retreating figure, her gaze fixed on the horizon, a silent prayer for peace on her lips. The dust settled, but the air remained thick with unspoken emotions. Silas Croft was gone, but his threat lingered, a dark cloud over the Double Bar Ranch. Jedediah and Thomas stood for a moment, their rifles still smoking, the adrenaline slowly receding. Eleanor emerged from the house, her arms around her children, her relief palpable. Clara stepped onto the porch, her gaze shifting from the retreating figure of Croft to the faces of the people she had come to care for. She saw the weariness in Jedediah's eyes, the lingering tension in Thomas's shoulders. She looked at Lily, her small hand clutching her mother's dress, her eyes wide with a fear she was trying to hide. "He's gone," Eleanor whispered, her voice trembling. "For now." Thomas put an arm around her. "We'll be ready if he comes back." He then turned to Jedediah, his expression one of deep gratitude. "Thank you, Jedediah. You saved us." Jedediah, unaccustomed to such direct praise, merely nodded. "We looked out for each other," he said gruffly, his gaze briefly meeting Clara's. He saw a shared understanding pass between them, a recognition of the courage they had all displayed. He realized that the confrontation had forged a deeper bond between him and Thomas, a bond cemented by shared danger and mutual respect. In the days that followed, a quiet sense of normalcy began to return, albeit tinged with caution. The storm passed, leaving behind a crisp, clear autumn air. Thomas, his resolve strengthened, worked alongside Jedediah with renewed vigor. Eleanor, her spirit lifted, became more active, her laughter returning to the house. One evening, as Jedediah sat by the fire, Clara approached him, a basket of mending in her hands. She sat down opposite him, her usual reserve softened by the shared experience. "Mr. Stone," she began, her voice soft, I wanted to thank you for standing by Thomas and Eleanor. You didn't have to." Jedediah looked at her, a hint of surprise in his eyes. "They needed help," he said, the familiar words sounding different this time. He met her gaze and saw not just gratitude, but a deep understanding. "You did too, Clara. You stayed and faced it with them." A faint blush touched Clara's cheeks. "I couldn't leave them," she said simply. "They became family." Jedediah felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling that had nothing to do with the fire. He saw Clara not just as a capable housekeeper, but as a compassionate woman, a pillar of strength. He realized that in protecting Thomas and Eleanor, he had also found something he hadn't realized he was seeking, a connection, a sense of belonging. He saw that Clara, in her quiet way, felt the same. The shared ordeal had stripped away their defenses, revealing a vulnerability and a strength that drew them closer. The autumn winds whispered through the prairie grasses, carrying the scent of pine and distant rain. The threat of Silas Croft had receded, his angry words fading into the vastness of the territory, though the memory of his presence served as a constant reminder of the unpredictable nature of life on the frontier. Thomas and Eleanor, their spirits renewed and their bond strengthened, had decided to stay on at the Double Bar Ranch. Thomas had proven himself a valuable hand, and Jedediah, for the first time in years, felt the weight of his solitude begin to lift. Lily, her fear replaced by a newfound confidence, was often seen playing with Clara, their laughter echoing across the yard. The children, having weathered the storm of uncertainty, now thrived in the stable environment. Eleanor, her health fully restored, had become an indispensable part of the ranch, her presence bringing a warmth and grace that had been missing for so long. Jedediah found himself looking forward to the evenings, not for the quiet solitude, but for the shared meals, the conversations that flowed more easily now. He especially found himself drawn to Clara. Her quiet strength, her unwavering compassion had chipped away at his hardened exterior, revealing a gentler man beneath. He admired her resilience, her ability to find beauty and nurture growth even in the harshest of circumstances. One crisp evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jedediah found Clara standing by the fence, her gaze fixed on the distant mountains. He walked up to her, the crunch of his boots on the dry earth the only sound breaking the silence. "Still dreaming of what's beyond the horizon, Clara?" he asked, his voice softer than usual. Clara turned, a faint smile gracing her lips. "Just appreciating the view, Mr. Stone. It's a beautiful land." Jedediah stood beside her, his gaze following hers. "It is," he agreed, "but it's better with company." He paused, gathering his courage. "Clara," he began, his voice a little rough, I've come to value your presence here, more than I can say." Clara met his gaze, her eyes filled with a quiet understanding. She saw the sincerity in his words, the years of loneliness etched in his face, slowly giving way to a hesitant hope. "And yours, Mr. Stone," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "This place, it's become home." In that shared glance, a new chapter began to unfold, not just for the family they had helped to protect, but for Jedediah and Clara themselves. The future was still uncertain. The frontier always held its challenges, but for the first time, Jedediah felt a sense of optimism. He had found something he hadn't been actively searching for, a connection, a shared purpose, and the quiet promise of a future where solitude was no longer a burden, but a choice. The Double Bar Ranch, once a symbol of his isolation, was now a testament to the enduring strength of the human spirit, a place where rescue, care, and even love could find fertile ground to bloom. The horizon, once a symbol of escape, now represented a shared journey, a new beginning under the vast Montana sky.